Perfect. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Starting it now. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. We're just going to give 1 or 2 minutes to let folks filter in, but feel free to put in the chat to everyone where you're joining from, what city and country. Great. Lots of folks from all over so far. Hi, everyone. If you're just joining, feel free to add into the chat your name and the city or country you're joining from, and we'll get started in just 1 minute. Great. I think we could probably get started and let more folks join. Thank you, everyone, for participating today. This is our webinar celebrating ITDP's Cycling Cities campaign and the closing of it after 4 years. And we're looking forward to a great discussion. Just to go through some technical details about the webinar. This session will be recorded and we will upload the recordings in the various languages that we have available after the webinar. And we do have live interpretations available today. The webinar will be held in English, but if you toggle in your toolbar in the interpretation section, we do have Spanish and Portuguese interpretations as well. And you can feel free to also use the chat box if you have questions or comments, but primarily if you have a question for the panelists, you can use the Q&A function, which is also under the toolbar. You don't need to raise your hand. We'll be looking through the Q&A in the chat for questions as the discussion picks up. So with that, I'd like to introduce Heather Thompson, ITDP CEO, who can give some context and overview about the Cycling Cities campaign and introduce the rest of our speakers today. Great.
Well, hello everyone. I'm really happy to be here today, and I would say I'm excited for this session. We have so much to celebrate, but also maybe a little bit sad as we're closing our Cycling Cities campaign after a really great 4 years, hopefully with involvement of all of you. As we all know, the global pandemic in 2020 upended the ways all of us moved and lived in our cities. And in particular, public transport ridership especially took a major hit. Many cities needed to find ways to quickly adapt their transportation to provide more affordable, more accessible, and healthier modes of transport. And with that, cycling emerged as a crucial lifeline for residents and essential workers to reach destinations and services, especially while public transport was limited. ITDP recognized in that moment that there was a strong need for advocacy and support, particularly in the regions where we work, to provide safe, accessible, and integrated cycling resources and infrastructure everywhere. Recognizing those needs in places where we work and knowing that it extended much further, with that, we launched the Cycling Cities campaign at COP 2026 in Glasgow in 2021 as a global network to connect diverse governments, planners, institutions, and advocates around the world with cycling best practices, tools, and data. Now, 4 years later, we're bringing the campaign to a close. but the research, peer-to-peer learning, and relationships built amongst our cohort of cities and partners will remain a major source of inspiration. It's clear to us that the knowledge, interests, and resources already exist. What the campaign has shown us all is that the right mix of investment, collaboration, and political will is all we need to transform any city into a cycling city. I would like to thank all the governments, officials, organizations, and pledge signers who committed to joining us in this campaign. We know that the demand is there, and we must commit to building on this momentum. I hope that this is the beginning of even more action from national and local governments, philanthropic groups, and development banks to integrate active mobility into their investments and agendas. Dana, our campaign lead, will share more details on the impacts and outcomes of cycling cities before we dive into a discussion with our great panel of speakers. Thank you all for joining us for this session and for this ride. Over to you, Dana.
Great. Thanks so much, Heather. And just echoing, how bittersweet it is to be able to come together to celebrate the great progress that we've seen over the past couple of years as part of Cycling Cities, but also to think about, wrapping up this phase of the campaign. We're excited to see where this goes next. So before we bring on our panelists, I just wanted to take a few moments to highlight some of the impacts of cycling cities. And I think this will help to frame the conversation that we're looking to have later in the webinar. So when I was thinking about this, when we launched Cycling Cities back in 2021 through to today, the thing that really stuck with me is that there has been massive growth in both support and infrastructure on the ground that's supporting cycling. And this is not just happening in the cities that we have typically thought of as cycling cities. Cycling has grown and continues to grow in every region of the world. And I think the best way to demonstrate this is actually to show you this map of our cohort cities. So these are the 34 cities that came onto the campaign, committing to expanding their cycle networks and also to implement programs and policies that better support people using bicycles. So I think a few years ago, most of these cities would not necessarily be at the top of the list of cycling cities, but now it's really a different story. And again, these are the cities that have been really involved throughout the course of the campaign. 34 cities across 6 continents. This is really demonstrating the diversity of cities that are really elevating cycling. This is happening in every region across the world. And we're really seeing a lot of these cities rise to the top in terms of what they're able to deliver in terms of cycling infrastructure and support. But of course, cycling cities and ITDP haven't been the only ones leveraging this growing momentum around cycling. Every single organization on this slide has also played a really critical role. We have local cycling groups that have organized things like cycle trainings and group rides, new knowledge network platforms that are bringing together research and on-the-ground experience, philanthropy, and international organizations. This coalition has really helped to scale the Cycling Cities vision, and has also enabled us to really influence conversations and ultimately decision-making across all of these different geographies and all different levels of government. When we launched Cycling Cities, we really focused on getting more high-quality, safe cycle lanes on the ground in our cohort cities. Protected cycle lanes are one of the best ways to encourage people to use bicycles, especially women and young children. And we've seen that these transformations can have really major impacts. So in our cohort cities, more than 900 kilometers of protected cycle lanes have been built in the past 4 years. And another more than 1,000 kilometers of unprotected lanes have also been built. So upwards of 2,000 kilometers of cycle lanes built over the past 4 years in our cohort cities. This is a massive amount. And this has generated nearly 1.5 billion kilometers traveled by bicycle on those new protected lanes and offset 877 million vehicle kilometers as a result of those new lanes being available. And just to put that into a little bit of context, through 2050, this shift projected to result in 3 million tons of CO2 emissions avoided, which is also massive. But of course, cycle infrastructure needs to connect people to the places they want to go. And the cohort cities on this slide are the ones that saw the largest increases in population served as a result of new protected cycle lanes built between 2021 and the end of 2024. So I think it's worth noting a couple of things that these cities have in common that have been instrumental in the type of progress that they've been able to make in such a short time. So first is having a clear cycle lane or active mobility plan that really helps to set the vision and prioritize projects for implementation. They also have strong institutional capacity and technical support that's helping to deliver high quality infrastructure and policy support as well. And then finally, the funding to actually implement these projects, start connecting existing cycle lanes, and really expand networks. So momentum for cycling is still growing. Cycling Cities has been really effective in building a really engaged community that has been a big part of this momentum. All of you who are here today and many, many more who are not have been a part of this. And we really want to make sure that the transformations and change that we've seen over the past couple of years continue to scale. So how can we do that? How can we continue what Cycling Cities has started? So first is building more high quality cycle lane networks. Even though we've seen really great progress in our cohort cities and beyond in terms of getting more cycle lanes on the ground, most cities are still working towards a true network of safe cycle lanes. So we really need to work to get to that point. And so things like design standards can help to make sure that cities aren't starting from scratch every time and can really help to speed up the decision-making and implementation process. Next is thinking more strategically about how cycling can link to other modes of transport, particularly public transport, thinking about station area design and making more direct connections between cycling and public transport access. So really thinking about cycling not as kind of the end in itself, but really as a means of expanding access and providing more transport options for people. Thinking about national government buy-in and funding, I think in a lot of places there's still a disconnect between local and national governments when it comes to cycling. In a lot of cases, national ministries viewing cycling more as a local issue and one that doesn't necessarily qualify for or need access to national funding. So thinking about efforts to more explicitly include cycling in NDCs or as part of national NMT plans or national urban mobility plans can really help to start unlocking higher levels of funding. And then finally, thinking about all of the potential benefits of cycling. Cycling has a lot of co-benefits. It's not just an environmental solution. We have a lot of evidence now that really shows how cycling benefits public health, helps to improve air quality, and even contributes to economic development and jobs access. So we really need to use this more targeted messaging to speak to decision makers' current priorities. So with that, I just want to note that we will be releasing this wrap-up report today that kind of pulls together the whole narrative of cycling cities and goes into some more detail around the impacts and especially highlights a lot of the great stories and progress from our cohort cities. There's some beautiful photos in there, some really great storytelling. So I really encourage you to check out that report. That will be available at ITDP's publication page later today. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to bring in our panelists for today. So first we have Sam Johnson. Sam is a sustainable transport specialist with the World Bank, where he provides transport infrastructure planning and financing guidance with a particular focus on active mobility to national governments in the Pacific Islands. His background is in civil engineering and sustainable development, and he is currently on secondment at Eindhoven University of Technology, researching national funding commitments for active mobility. Welcome, Sam. Next, we have Fernanda Rivera. Fernanda is a senior specialist in sustainable mobility policy and has worked for more than a decade in governmental agencies in Mexico on cycling implementation, public transport, and road safety projects. In particular, Fernanda was responsible for the implementation of Mexico City's bike share system, EcoBC, and she often employs a gender perspective on mobility. Fernanda is currently pursuing a master's in transport and city planning at University College London. Welcome, Fernanda.
Thank
And
you.
last but certainly not least, we have Sarah Abdelkader. Sarah's background is in data engineering, and she has worked in geoinformatics for more than 5 years. Based in Egypt, Sarah has worked on several regional cycling and micromobility projects, including with bike share operator Badel to launch Cairo Bike in Cairo, Egypt. She holds master's degrees in geospatial technologies and in geoinformation technology. So thank you so much, Sarah, for joining us as well. Great to have you all here. So we are going to kick things off with a couple of questions that we have prepared, but I'm also going to be keeping an eye on the chat and on our Q&A box. If there are questions or thoughts from our participants, we are happy to try to integrate those into the conversation as well. So feel free to share those, and we will do our best to get to them. So the first question that I want to start with is for all three of you, just to kind of frame the conversation a little bit, and drawing from kind of some of the takeaways from what I just presented for Cycling Cities. So I want to start with what you think has been kind of the biggest mark of progress for cycling over the past 4 or 5 years. Is there sort of a tipping point moment or something that you think has really shifted how people are thinking about urban cycling? So do we have someone who wants to jump in first, or I can voluntold you?
I can jump
Yeah,
in
you wanna go
first.
ahead?
Yeah.
Great.
It's great to be with you all, and congratulations ITDP on this milestone. I think you've just done a tremendous job pushing this agenda, and like you said, it is really starting to run away. I think we are over a tipping point. The big difference for me is that I don't think that the debate is now focusing on why cycling, why active mobility. It's about how. So if you look in in policy documents, or if you just look in debate amongst policymakers, everyone kind of gets it. I'm generalizing. In some places, it's more supported than others, but you don't have to fight that fight as much, is what I'm seeing. It's more about the how do we do it. I think a great example of showing that high-level support, you can look at examples like the new Pan-African Active Mobility Action Plan being adopted for a huge number of countries last year. You have the Pan-European Walking and Cycling Master Plans. This year, the UN the UN Road Safety Week was all focused on walking and cycling. That's stuff we wouldn't have seen 4 years ago. So yeah, I think we're heading into a boom era for active mobility. There's so much more to say, but maybe Fernanda and Sarah want to come in.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks, Sam. Sarah, I think you maybe had come off mute, so I'll go to you.
Yeah. Well, something that I can say is, let's say, the context. So, if I tell you back then, like 4 years ago, even if there is gonna be a bike sharing system in a city like Cairo, I mean, whenever I find even someone international, I say Cairo, they say, yeah, one of those most crowded cities. So imagine having a bike sharing system in the heart of this crowded city. So for me, this was something that's really I can see the shift, and maybe we can come to this later, but it's about even the social perception for this. So back then, even years ago, it wasn't the same as you can see it right now. So this is like on the local scale. And even speaking, like I've been to several conferences and events with other people from different countries, and what I can see that it's the same that what Sam said. It's no longer like why, but it's just like how can we do this, and learning from other experiences. And something that I really like is like localizing the experience itself. So now we're settled that we're gonna have it, but the question is that how to make it local and how to do this shift based on each one and different perspectives for each region and each country. So yeah, that's how I see it. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. Over to you, Fernanda.
Okay, first, thank you. I'm really happy to be sharing here with all of you. But I think that the big change also is that now we see bicycles as a transport. You know, usually we used to think of a recreational mode, of a sport vision, and now we see it as a mode of transport. And that changed completely the way we see commuting. Now we know that commuting could be fun, commuting can be healthy, commuting can be environmental friendly or sustainable. So it's changing the way we perceive how we move on a daily basis. And the most important thing is I always say that we all have now a friend that is a cyclist. And that's the biggest change that we could ever have. Because if you know someone that cycle, that might be this little hope that you might become a cyclist too. So I think those are two differences, the individual, but also the community perspective of transport.
Yeah, it's really interesting to have like what Sam was saying, kind of this shift at the highest levels, like these international, multi-country networks that are coming together and trying to share knowledge and learn from each other. And then we're also seeing it at the hyper-local level, what Sarah was saying about social perceptions changing on the ground and more people cycling and more people knowing people who cycle, and having a more clear connection and understanding and even empathy for cyclists moving around the city. So I think there's a couple of questions in the Q&A that have already kind of alluded to this, but I think, we're always looking for kind of success stories. What are we hearing from either cities where you've worked or maybe, traveled to, that have kind of made things work, and what has been what needs to be there to make this work? Is it the financial side? Is it technical support? Is it cultivating champions? Like what are kind of the key pieces or building blocks that we need to have in place? Maybe I'll start with you, Fernanda, this time.
Perfect. I think that every city has different needs, no? Because there are cities that are starting and they might need this technical support because we do not learn, well, we learn how to make cycling cities. So I strongly believe that sharing with other governments and the role that Cycling Cities campaign help us to achieve is that we can share the experience of real life because you usually can read a lot of guides, but when you listen how hard it could be to implement, it's also useful. And of course, in cities that already have cycling infrastructure, bike sharing is how you have the financial resources reallocated for cycling. Because we all know that a lot of money goes for cars, and how we have all this money reallocated, at least for active mobility, for public transport, for massive modes. So I think that will make a difference because we'll make easier for people to choose the bike within the different modes of transport in our cities.
Sarah, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, also maybe building on this, something interesting that I noticed sometimes, even if the infrastructure is not well designed, still people shift to this. So it's again about maybe the awareness itself or how we can get people to believe more in that cycling can be a good alternative. And Fernando is also saying that it's seen now that no longer it's something for fun or just for leisure, but people for commuting. And even it's increasing here. Like originally I come from Alexandria, so maybe the traffic is not as in Cairo. And I've noticed that there are many and many people using this, for delivery more than just motorbikes. So I feel that it's emerging somehow. But it's different. I know the context can be different and from city to another, but the shift is there. I mean, it's already happening for this. So yeah, but it's working. Like I feel it, we are in the way to this. And also, I remember when we were first establishing Cairo Bike, we were learning a lot from the experience in Mexico, and that's how like you try to, look to something in the similar context. Because of if you look to Berlin, for example, maybe the infrastructure was already there, and years ago the mindset itself doesn't need this much work like to shift it. Or maybe in Amsterdam, they already know that it's something by default you're gonna have a bike, but it's not the same here in Cairo. So it's good also to keep learning from similar contexts, but of course the implementation will have its barriers. But still, like having this global, say like global vision, like how we learned from others, like give you an experience like where we can proceed. Like you're not actually inventing the wheel, you're just completing, on what was already built there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great to hear that there are some learnings from Mexico and maybe some of Fernando's early work. That's great.
Yeah.
Just to come in before you go to the next one, Dana, I think the other thing is that we're getting all these great impacts, right? But actually most cities are still doing it on a shoestring budget. They have the policy framework is better. They have the bike plans, like all of that kind of planning and design work's getting better, but they're still having to work with chump change, frankly, compared to what the general road budget is. And I think that's actually the next frontier, is that at the municipal level and at the Ministry of Transport and Infrastructure level, they need to get serious on allocating substantial portions of road spending to active mobility, because we know now, like we have all this great research to show that the return on investment is great, just on economic terms, but also in revenue generation terms, in taxation and economic development, in broader tourism benefits. Like we have this fantastic evidence base that shows that this type of infrastructure actually is even if you just look at it purely at an economic point of view, it makes sense. And if you have limited budgets, you should be spending as much as you can on it. And of course, there's issues and challenges with that, and there's trade-offs with how money should be spent. But I think imagine what we could do if we weren't just working with shoestring budgets. I think that's something for the next 4 years.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think it's also, there could be some avenues for support that cities could be taking advantage of, but haven't quite been able to access. In a lot of cases, cities are just using direct funding to implement cycle infrastructure. And, there's a lot of competing needs for that funding, even in the transport space, thinking about, supporting public transport versus active mobility, and how can we think about linking those together in a way that works for the budget as well, I think is complicated but important. So now we're going to go to kind of the other side of the coin, which is thinking about, what isn't quite working well. We've made a lot of progress over the past couple of years, but there are still some areas that, we need to work on. There's a question in the chat that speaks to, some governments looking to remove bike lanes that have been installed in recent years, and negative public perception related to those. Just curious to hear what your experiences have been, if there's other areas where we can look to do better, and how we might start to do that. Maybe I'll start with you, Sarah.
Well, yeah, that's very challenging, specifically in a country like Egypt. It's not the easiest. Specifically, that there is again the same direction, like as we are still building bike lanes, but like really very small and maybe limited to the number of bridges that you're building, the roads. So yeah, I guess it takes like people like us and like the local community to raise their voice. Like whenever there is, let's say, like a meeting, like decision makers, and I guess one of those examples also is this partnership with the for the bike sharing system that we have right now with the Cairo governorate. So I guess we can just do this here, at least by leading by example. So this was implemented. It was said like maybe years ago that it's impossible to have this working and running. People will not see it as something that's important, but we just do it. As we were just discussing, we have to start somewhere. So we started by having this. We also had it in another city, like in Sharm el Sheikh. So the thing is that how I see it, it is challenging. Just let's be honest, it is challenging to have it implemented. But then we have to begin and then learn from learn by example. Like like we have it already. We know there are some barriers and some. I would say, like for example, from current experiences, the vandalism that we see, like maintenance cost, for example, there are really big challenges for this. But on the other hand, we just don't leave it and no, it's not working. No, we keep working, keep trying. Also, maybe the target audience is different. Like if we target the correct people, you will have more people cycling. And like example for this, for example, my parents, they're just old, but when I see, like when they see how I'm passionate about this, I'm leading this, I find them even sending me like posts about people cycling. I saw this person doing this. So you see, this is how you spread the idea. So I guess this is how you work. It's basically working on the mindset. It's not gonna change like in a day, like in one or two. But if we learn from other countries, like of course the example of Amsterdam is well known. So it took years for this to happen. So it's again the persistence, I would say, advocacy, having groups which are consistently working on this, even organizing rides, being present. I would say, like being visible and present in the street. I guess this is how it can work. I know other areas might be different, but in countries, I would say, who share the same mindset, that like the power of the people. So I guess this is the way to have it done. And even like the gender, yeah, there's a lot to be said about this, but maybe before I wasn't really this confident. But having a group, for example, of girls, like we go on the street and then people start to see this as something common. You can see it. So it's no longer something that people were criticize or comment on, just normal. So it's again the power of the people, and we have to do it. I mean, this is how things change, I guess, even anywhere. It's not just about cycling.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think bike share plays a big role in what you were saying, Sarah, in terms of the visibility, building awareness, seeing people riding bicycles who maybe you don't expect, not just, young men, and giving that kind of access to bicycles in places where people maybe don't own their own bikes. And yeah, so I think bike share can play a really key role there.
True.
Fernanda, you want to go ahead?
Yes, I think that's something we need to speak up. It's about the gender gap. No, we have to recognize that there's still a gender gap in cycling. And we need to be vocal about it to have more women, more girls riding a bicycle on the streets and make the right questions because we don't know exactly what are the answers. If the bicycle was an emancipator for the suffragists and women, then we need to have this emancipation of cycling and reduce the gender gap. So I think that's a discussion that we need to have. And the second part, I think that in the global south, a lot of cities were having this silent battle with motorbikes and with these two-wheelers that are really fast. So we need to make bikes sexy again because we need to win this battle, because it's a road safety concerns, noise, and whatever externalities we can think about. So I think that we need to keep pushing cycling as this real solution. So make it easy. And we need to speak about it because if we just hide the problems that we're having of more motorcycles, more two-wheelers, we are gonna miss this big opportunity to continue promoting cycling as a mode of transport.
I've adding on that about the gender aspect. I've heard some designers say that if you're not seeing a large proportion of women or young children on your network, then your network's not good enough. The quality is not good enough. It's not comfortable enough. It's not safe enough. Of course, there's other aspects to that beyond just the infrastructure design, but I think that's a good barometer of quality. But the other thing that I think that we can do better at is that this agenda can be apolitical. It can be supported by both the left and the right. And too often it is just seen as something associated with the left. And then that means that when you have a change of government and they are more on the right-leaning side, they want to reverse it, or you get caught up with these identity politics. Actually, there's so many things about cycling that the right can support. And I think we need to be better at selling that this is something everyone can get behind. The other thing is that cycling policy is not just about mobility policy. It's actually a means to more livable cities. And it's about making places better to live, to shop, to play, to be with your friends and family, for your children. All these narratives have much broader cross-sectional appeal to all demographics. And if we put it that way, I think it's more sticky and we can be more ambitious. But if we just frame it as something for the cyclist, it's divisive.
Yeah, I think this is such a good point, like this taking cycling out of the political agenda. And I think that's been, we've seen that in places where cycling makes up a large share of trips, like in Western Europe and in some other places. But it's really important to think about how to tailor messaging and benefits of cycling and the returns on the investment in cycling for all ranges of the political spectrum. Sarah, Fernanda, did you want to pick up on any of those points?
I think that, well, just to add up, is like the institutions are important. So having these teams that can give continuity to how cycling policies should be implemented in the city are really important. I saw it in Mexico City. Now it's something normal that every new government know that there's a cycling office, that there's someone that is in charge of having these cycling policies. And it took like 25 years. No, it's not something that happened in a blink. But now you can see the relevant role of how the institutions can make a difference on the continuity of every cycling policy. So I always recognize that of Mexico City, how it started evolving from nothing to a formal institution in the mobility department.
I wish we reach this point one day. But for now, it's still, again, I would say starting. It's not this world, and it's nice that Fernando said it doesn't really, it didn't take just a blink of an eye. But we started this, and the nice thing that we started to see and hear, even in new cities, we're having different new cities built, and you see this question even not from experts, nothing, no one involved, and they say, like, why don't we have good sidewalk for this? We need to have it present, and we need to fix that what wasn't happening in older cities in the new ones. So there is this direction as well, and this is something really important. Something as well, I would say it's important to have, like, whenever you go doing this master plan, there should be someone involved in this planning who's passionate about this, not only learning this, because we have studied this, but not everyone is implementing actually. Like, I've seen cities, like, people I would say my age, and people who know how important it is to have this implemented, to have the active mobility working. We need to have sidewalks, bike lanes, but they're not implementing this. So even the passion is also should be there. And again, it's how it works in our area. It's by visibility. You need to be visible. We need to keep promoting this, having groups in the morning. I don't know, like having rides, events, and then you keep pushing. And I'll just share one quick example that I remember. The Ministry here of Youth 2 years ago, after this pandemic, they found that, like, many people shifted to using bikes. So then it was something from the government. They decided, okay, we're gonna share, like, have some share of bikes subsidized for people who can use them, like low income people. So this is how it happened. Like, before this, nobody even thought about it. But just when you see it happening, like, maybe the government start shift towards this. But again, it's taking time. But as they say, like, it's no matter how slowly you go, as long as you don't stop. So this is how it's working here, I guess.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Mm.
Something I want to pick up on, Fernanda, that you mentioned and that there's some questions about in the Q&A is a trend that we've also seen, I think, increase in a lot of places over the past couple of years in particular, is kind of the rise of two-wheelers and just the growth in the use of two-wheelers, particularly for delivery, but also as private personal transport. And how can we think about opportunities to shift some of those trips to lower speed e-bikes? How can we think about leveraging electrification of internal combustion engine two-wheelers as a way to support that shift? Like, how can we start thinking about the interplay between higher speed, heavier two-wheelers and lower speed e-bikes or even pedal bikes, as we're seeing the growth of two-wheelers in a lot of cities? Just curious to hear your thoughts on this.
I think that the first discussion that we need to have is in which box each of these different technologies we need to put them in, because you have like electric bikes, pedal assisted bikes that are quite different to these two-wheelers that are super fast. So speed should be our first discussion, to have an agreement of what we should do towards speed, because I think that what is incompatible is cycling. It has a specific human speed, and when you have these two and three wheelers that are really, really, really fast, it's hard for people to share the spaces. So we need to have this discussion, this debate regarding speed. And the second is technology, no? Because we prefer, of course, electric vehicles rather than an internal combustion motorbike. So that's the second thing, how we take advantage of all these technologies, but always keeping in mind how important and relevant it is to keep the speed safe for everyone.
It's a complicated question, and it really depends on the context of the city and the relative existing prevalence of the different modes. Say if a city is already got a very high mode share of motorized two-wheelers, then that's very different to if it's that highest share is with IC or four-wheeler cars, of course. But I think, yeah, I echo Fernanda's point. It's about speed. It's also about mass. It's also about thinking that we want to make sure that the limited road space that the city has is not just being there's not just competition between these two forms of two-wheeler modes, while the four-wheel car gets the ample space, it gets a free ride. So they shouldn't be fighting amongst each other. We know this happens. But yeah, I think that it's very context specific.
Yeah, absolutely. And Fernanda, your point on kind of the need for clear classification is really important, and kind of understanding what the differences in speeds between these vehicles are. And Sam, your point to, making sure that we're not just further dividing up the small space that's being allotted for two-wheeled vehicles. And really thinking about street design, supporting, the modes that people are using, and really ensuring that the safest, slower modes are being prioritized.
Yeah.
Sarah, you want to add something there?
Yeah, I agree. It's very city specific. It depends, it differs, I'm sure, but yeah, it's the safety concern, because for us they share like specifically probably like the same space, and how to say it, like they're not much considered in the street, so they try to like adapt with each other, and sometimes even you find them, even in some cases, someone with a bike like holding a motorbike and moving together. So it's because they feel that we own this part of the street. So I guess this should be even considered or in the planning itself, in the street design, because they need to feel safe. I mean, like the rest, like in a car, you feel like more much protected than motorbike, and of course more than a bike. So this needs to be considered, and it's not easily done, but it has to be, like, because as you always say, like safety comes first. So it should be something like having a safe space for everyone in the streets. I agree.
Yeah, I mean, even just thinking about, cycling in the context of, what's happening with two-wheelers, I think, there's a tendency to just think about, if we're addressing cycling, we're doing cycle lanes, maybe we're doing bike share, but there's sort of this narrow view to it. But obviously there's this interplay with other modes, and just thinking about street space availability and priority. And it's really important to just have that broader context, I think, is what we're hearing. So I want to move to another point that we get a lot of questions about, which is data collection and data availability for cycling. I think many of us know that there has been kind of limited data available for cycling, even things like tracking modal share over time, and being able to do more than maybe just, cyclist counts. So just want to talk a little bit about ways that you've been able to or seen kind of progress for cycling tracked, whether that's locally, nationally, like what are sort of the venues where we can see and track progress on cycling, and what are some of the key indicators that you think are critical?
Well, I can share Mexico City's experience.
Sure.
We all know this phrase, no? What we don't count doesn't count. So the first step is to know how many cyclists you have. It's good to know the number, just how it has increased along the years, because it can give you a reference of what is working, what's not working, how many cyclists are there on the streets. We just had a counting in Mexico City last year, and there was an increase from 267,000 in 2018 to 456,000 daily trips on a bicycle in Mexico City. So you see a 71% increase, and now you have also that information to be vocal about it. Are against cycling to people that are cyclists. So it's also a good way of communicating with data. Second, to have the demographics. We need to see who is cycling, where is people cycling, who is the people that is using the bike, to understand who is the people that isn't using the bicycle. So that's also an important part, not only to count who is using it, but who is not using it and how you can encourage all of them. So I strongly believe in having cycling counts, to be vocal about the results of these cycling counts, to also be critical about this data that you collect to see what opportunities or challenges every city has. And last but not least, to segregate the data, no? So you can know who is cycling. So that will be my biggest recommendation.
Absolutely. Great point, Fernanda.
Maybe I can share as well, but from operators even perspective for this bike sharing. The first point, as Fernanda mentioned, exactly like who's riding the bike, and we look at it as well from the gender perspective, and also like for the reason, like we have sometimes we do these surveys to understand like why are you using the bike, you're going for work or just for fun, and we started to see an increased number of people who take it to work or to commute. So it's different, because even one of the answers was because it's faster than the public transportation in this area. So we find this as a factor of like measuring our success. And deep inside, from the operator perspective, it's about the vandalism. When this project first started, the Cairo Bike project, we faced a lot of vandalism cases, and like people were not happy with it. And always like sometimes people are not really fine with the change, and this project is not going to work. But over the time, we have this count of bikes which were destroyed. Some of them were lost, but then returned. So when we see the curve of the number of bikes that need this kind of maintenance, or that were facing this vandalism, it's really decreasing over time. And in the last couple of months, we would say like it has almost come to zero, like out of 250 bikes in the middle of Cairo. And if you really know Cairo, you know how crowded it is, and how you can like it's really hard to keep them safe. So this is from this perspective, I would say it's a great achievement for us, and we find it like a point of strength, and the factor also indicating that okay, this is working, because the very beginning it was so challenging, but I'd say now it's improving. Even the interesting part that you find people sending us who are not using the bike, like we have seen someone doing this to the bike, taking photos and reporting that please take care of this area, please check this. So it's like you the sense of ownership, although they don't really own the project, but still they got this feeling because they find it present, it's affordable. So they started to feel like, okay, this is part of the community. It's not something imposed on the people, or it's just because of showing off, like we're doing this project. No, it is for you, for the people. You can use it, available for everyone. So then we started to feel this even connectivity. I guess that's something that uh, it can be much measured, but still you can feel it. And this is also can be an indicator of the success of this project.
Uh, uh, Can I take your question in a slightly different direction, Dana?
Absolutely.
It still refers to tracking, but I actually am advocating that we need to, of course, we need to monitor movement and usage, but we need to start tracking funding much more, both in commitment levels, but then in actual spending. And because when it comes down to it, like I said, in the policy documents and in the bike plans, the narrative's good. But it's not like don't tell me what you value. It's like show me your budget and I'll tell you what you actually value and what you're actually spending money on. So I think that's something that should be rolled out because as Bernardo says in the chat, the reality is that some of the policies that we're seeing is it's kind of a bit like you've got a bath full of water and you're taking water out of the bath with new good policies, but you're still running the tap. If you've got a lot of your road agency spending going on policies that support motorization. And I know there's a case for things, infrastructure needs to be maintained, etc., but actually need to get more serious and actually keeping authorities accountable to spending more. And I think that there's a role, and this is an article the bank released this week, that we're advocating that actually at the national level and also at provincial levels and at municipal levels, cities, these actors should start considering setting minimum annual spending targets to make the case for ring fencing funds, so that you don't have to fight tooth and nail for every single project section, but to have consistent funding available. Admittedly, in some cases, it's going to start from a very low base, because only, in many cases, it's a 0.1% of road spending is on this agenda, but at least to start building that up, and then we can really get to work. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a really important point. There's not a lot of transparency around funding for cycling, active mobility more broadly, especially in city budgets. I know ITDP India and some of our other teams have done some work on this, trying to dig into getting what that actual percentage is that's being spent on active mobility. And it's really challenging, even with, public budget documents. But it takes a lot of time. And, it can be really hard to even differentiate what different budget lines are going to, and to categorize those and to track it over time. So this is a really important point to think about, how we use data, and some new perhaps applications of things like large language models to try to help with going through these large documents, and trying to pull out some of that information, so that we can have a better sense of where we're starting from, set a baseline, and then help to inform these types of commitments that you're talking about, Sam. So we are coming up on the hour, just a couple minutes left. I do just have a couple more questions I think we can squeeze in before we wrap up. So I just want to stay on this point of kind of national government, the role of national government, particularly for you, Sam and Fernanda, since you have some direct experience working with national governments. Kind of how has the conversation changed at the national level in governments that you've been working with? And how has the connection been made more clearly that, between cycling as a local issue versus the benefits of cycling at the national level? Kind of how have you tried to make that case, or heard that case made in your work?
I've been yabbering on a lot. I think you should go first, Fernanda.
Okay, perfect. Well, I work in local government for 12 years, and I started being an advocate myself, a cycling advocate that demanded the government to build cycle lanes, and then I became part of the government that needed to build cycle lanes. So I've seen a whole evolution of how now it's normal to have the discussion of cycling within this institutional local level. But the big question is, how can you make the funding of the national government come to this local level for cycling? Because usually cycling is seen as a little project, something that is minimum compared to these big infrastructure projects that are built usually with national funding. I always see an area of opportunity with intermodality, how we can connect the agenda of transport with the agenda of active mobility, because they go together, and when they're merged, you have more potential of any transport project that has a bike share really close to where the station is going to be built, or when you have cycling infrastructure that can recognize that people would love to get in on a bicycle because they have these longer distance trips, and that they can make this first and last mile connected with public bike sharing, with bicycle parking, with cycle lanes. So I think that for the national level, we start to put on the view of the national authorities that cycling can be a promoter of better public transport and better commuting with active travel and with massive transport. So we need to start recognizing that role of intermodality in our cities.
Yeah, to complement those excellent points, I think that the way to frame it, like you alluded to in your opening remarks, Dana, is that cycling is not just about local mobility. It's a national public good for many, many reasons, sustainable development reasons that different national level ministries can get behind, from health, from finance, from transport. Just because it happens at the local level doesn't mean it's not of nationally significant importance. And I think that the big new frontier here is on using national government grant programs and other funding mechanisms to channel to subnational and provincial level and local level government, just like we've done with highways in the past, just like we do with major public transport investments. I think the case is now, and some governments, actually national governments, are already doing this. Actually, even at the regional level, we have like EU level initiatives that function in this manner. But that's where the big money is. That's where the billions and billions of dollars are spent without a second thought. And we need to be tapping in and having that money flow down to provincial and city level interventions.
Right. So I think we'll have to wrap it there as we are at time. I want to thank all of our panelists for their great insights, obviously all coming from different regions, kind of different entry points to this, but all really helpful perspectives to hear from you. I know the chat has been active the whole time. Lots of good insights from there as well. And again, just want to thank all of you here who joined and all of you who have been part of the Cycling Cities Network over these past couple of years. We're really grateful to all of our cohort cities and our partner organizations who really made the campaign what it is today. Even though we're, officially wrapping things up, that doesn't mean that this work is stopping. That doesn't mean that we're not continuing to push for the things that we've been talking about today. And looking forward to continuing this ride with all of you. So thank you so much again, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, everyone.